part of my travel philosophy, I actually really like to talk about the philosophy of travel and what it means, because I really encourage people to not look at my path and the number of countries I've been to or the places I've been and feel any sense of envy. What I would encourage people to do is look at what I've done and try to say, what tools or what approach to life could I borrow from Collin and use to what's something that fires me up? Because I'm telling you, traveling is overrated. I love it, but anything that you love can hurt you too, right?
Welcome to the Spear and Clover podcast, the show about the art of crushing your goals and the discipline of loving your life while you do. I'm your host, Jason Skisick, the entrepreneurial evangelist, and each week I bring you the story of visionaries who see the world as it could be and can't help but take action. If you're enjoying these episodes, please take a moment to subscribe, like, and review. This is the best way to stay in the loop when we drop new content. And don't forget to share it with your friends. Today's guest is one of the few non-entrepreneurs we feature here at Spear and Clover. Collin Cousineau is a rockstar marketer in his professional life, but it's his personal life that we're most interested in today. Collin is certainly the most well-traveled person I know. He has been everywhere, including places like the Ukraine, Cuba, and even North Korea. In this conversation, we go deep into what he's learned from his travels, as well as his ethic around what it means to see the world. You definitely don't want to miss out on this one. Please welcome my friend, Collin Cousineau. This is definitely going to be a Clover-heavy episode of the Spear and Clover podcast. Collin Cousineau, correct?
Yep.
Collin, we've known each other forever, and I always fuck up your name. Collin, how you doing, buddy?
Good. Thanks for having me. It's good to see you. Been a while after everything that's happened over the past couple of years. I haven't seen you in like 2 or 3 years, but I could say that about a lot of people, right?
Yeah, and it feels like, you're somebody who, there's been a few times I've said this because I invite people like that on the show, but you're somebody who I always love talking to. I always wish I had more of you in my life. I think you have such an interesting sort of like life ethic, and that's why we've invited you here today. So Collin is one of the few people who is not an entrepreneur that comes on the show, and yet probably one of the few people who most represent what I would call the Spear and Clover lifestyle. So Collin, if you could do me a favor and tell me a little bit about what you do professionally, as well as a little bit about why we asked you on the show.
Sure. So, my professional journey has been a little unique, and actually to the point that, I know this is an entrepreneurial podcast. That was my original intent. I come from a family of entrepreneurs. And my goal when I was an undergrad in college, the reason I went into accounting was because I wanted to start a business. And I knew that, there's a couple things. If you don't have the skill set, you have to hire. I'm sure you talk about this with your other entrepreneurs. You got to hire your weaknesses, right? My thought was if I could be the entrepreneur and the accountant, that's one less role I'd have to hire. And, if I could support myself, and I was like, hey, if I marry an attorney, like we're off to the races here. So yeah, originally I majored in accounting and entrepreneurship, and my vision was to open a brewery. And this was way before the brewery. This was 2003 and 4. I was kind of ahead of the curve on that. And with all respect to all the work that you do and all of the other guests that you have on the show, I just can't occurred to me that it was really challenging work. I mean, I just got to be honest. Like I was interviewing the brewmaster at Great Lakes just for like feedback. Is this something I should do? And I'll never know if it was the right or wrong thing to do, but he's like, this is a lot of work. I'm very successful at it. I'm happen to be one of the guys that made it in this space. And I don't know if I would do it again. And that scared me. And that was it. That was like the end of my journey to entrepreneurship, but I still graduated, became a CPA, and I was an auditor in New York City for a while. That profession was not for me. So what I do now is I made a transition into digital media, digital advertising, specifically in programmatic. And if your programmatic advertising is essentially audience buying and pairing it with inventory, all in the digital space, the landscape that people are more familiar with is Facebook. Facebook it's technically programmatic. It's one landscape. What I do is the way Facebook advertising works, pairing audiences, buying audiences. I pair that with contextually relevant environments across the entire internet. So not limited to Facebook. So the teams that I run, we do YouTube, all of the social platforms and search, and then across the entire, the regular digital landscape. So when you go to a website and you see display ads, you see little video players pop up or whatever. My team does the digital buying of all of those units on behalf of our clients. And I work at a large media agency. So I've worked across several clients that are kind of flashy and that everyone's heard of. At least I hope you've heard of them, because what we're doing, it was for a company advertising for Porsche. I hope you've heard of Porsche before. Yeah, I worked on several clients, all name brands, ones that you've heard of. And it's been a good journey.
Yeah. And so to touch on that real quick, I got into craft breweries around the time that we met, which would have probably been like 2011, 2012. And at the time, as an entrepreneur, I was like, ooh, I want to get into that. And I took like one brew tour and just knew immediately that it wasn't for me. I mean, I feel like I might be able to make one good batch of beer, but what it takes to make a, sort of commercially available, consistent beer or something, or even liquor, if you do the distillery stuff, it just was not my bag. And then to speak on what you said about the entrepreneur thing, I totally agree. I don't think you should be an entrepreneur unless you have to be an entrepreneur, in which case I think it's the greatest thing in the world. But certainly, only if you feel like you have to. I don't feel like I could really, work for the types of corporations that I've worked for in the past and be happy about it,
And knowing yourself is half the battle, right? So, I recognize that I really do like a consistent paycheck. I have a lot of entrepreneur friends and I respect the game.
One thing that you do, though, that I think that a lot of corporate people feel like they can't is you are constantly looking over the fence, getting ready to go on an adventure. And to me, that's the reason. That's the really interesting thing. There's a few other interesting things about you I want to cover today, but the really interesting thing about you is that you do work in a corporate environment and have, I don't know if it's for different companies, but for several years. And still, we're having this conversation a day early because you're on a whim flying to Europe tomorrow. Is that right?
Yeah, that news is new to me as of this morning. So I've always been very adventure driven. I mean, I realize about myself that I have a maximizing personality type. Mm-hmm. So I'm always like, if you give me a day off, I'm immediately thinking about how can I use that? Oh, I don't normally get Fridays off. How can I take that 3-day weekend and do something special with it? When I was young, I read the 4-Hour Workweek when it came out, and I'm not an advocate. There you go. I'm not a huge advocate for Tim Ferriss, but I think that there's tons of nuggets in those books.
From a literal sense, I wouldn't use it as like a way to live my life completely, but that's one of my formative books as well. I couldn't agree. Yeah.
And so I've always been just like leaning so far forward into like satiating that wanderlust and wanting, and like the way you put it is like, I think that the thing that makes my journey unique is the pairing of professional success in a traditional environment with like the volume, like the amount of adventure that I've been able to go on. So I started at a young age. So kind of a funny story, like my grandfather remarried after my grandmother died, and his granddaughter was going to Europe. I was young. I was like 17, 18. She was going to Europe. And it was like a very romantic idea, right? Going backpacking in Europe, it's kind of like a rite of passage for rich white kids. And and she was going, and that gave me the courage to like, okay, I can go, I won't be like in your pocket, but I'll be over there. I can go with you. We can be on the flight. That way I'll have the confidence to go and do something. I mean, I was scared that first time I went, and I read a lot of books on how to prepare for it. She ended up canceling, and I ended up still going. And I got bit by the travel bug, and I've been very aggressively traveling ever since. And, part of my travel philosophy, I actually really like to talk about the philosophy of travel and what it means, because I really encourage people to not look at my path and the number of countries I've been to or the places I've been and feel any sense of envy. What I would encourage people to do is look at what I've done and try to say, what tools or what approach to life could I borrow from Collin and use to what's something that fires me up? Because I'm telling you, traveling is overrated. I love it, but anything that you love can hurt you too, right? And like I've cried in the Kiev train station because I got lost and missed the train and had to sleep on a bench at night. Like you don't see that side of it. You only see the Instagram side of it. So what I like to talk about is the philosophy of it, to talk about the tools that other people can use rather than giving you like what my favorite cheese in Paris was. Sure. I mean, you know what I mean? Like, I don't like to talk, I try to talk higher level than not just specifics.
Yeah. And so maybe if you could start us down the path of that philosophy. So what does traveling mean to you? What does it occupy in your mind and in your heart?
Yeah. For me, it changes as you age, right? Like anything that you love, any relationship that you have, no relationships last forever and they always change. And I'm at an age where I'm starting to feel, I'm past the age where I started to feel it. I mean, I think I'm well into this like more middle-aged type traveling. When I was younger, it was all about like smash and grab. Like I want to see as many cities as I can, visit as many countries as I can. What I didn't know at the time was that I was forming my own philosophy and my own approach to what travel means to me. And what I think at this point, what I have been doing and maybe didn't realize it at the time is expanding my capacity for empathy and understanding the world in a unique way. And I think that the expansion of your capacity for empathy is one of the more noble pursuits in adult life. And what I didn't realize is how much travel does that for you and how it changes your worldview. Without speaking to what it means politically, when you're in a country and, you start small. So you start in Ireland or England, it's a very familiar culture at a value level, very familiar culture to ours. There's that moment when you go to walk across the street and you're like, oh, they drive on the left over here. There's that moment where it's like, this is different, but we're the same. And then as you push yourself, and depending on what your journey through your travel and adventure looks like, you might end up in somewhere like Japan or China or Thailand or somewhere farther outside of your comfort zone. And you're like, oh, they use chopsticks, or something simple like that. Like, oh, they use chopsticks here. Oh, they drive on the left in Japan too. And you start to realize that we're all just people, and you can really start to see people for who they are. And it really expands your capacity for empathy, because now at home, when I see people doing something different, or we have a micro culture, we have the African American community, we have a Hispanic community, whatever the micro cultures are within our own country, when you're seeing those people, you're really seeing them as countrymen, as other humans, as other people. And I think that that's been the highest level gift that all of this travel has given to me. On a more micro level, I do talk about how it really expands your patience. Patience, like you're stuck in a train, you missed the flight or whatever, like you're going to be sitting on this ferry for 12 hours. You can really like appreciate time and be present. And I think that's another thing that travel does for you. I don't want to sound noble. I started this journey to party and to see Amsterdam and to, you know what I mean? Like to do all that. It's brought me to this place.
Yeah, I'll never forget. I lived in Germany when I was in the Army for a couple of years, and I'll never forget just getting off at the airport, walking out of the airport and getting onto the bus that was going to take me where we were going. And just looking around and seeing the way the buses were shaped and the way the trucks were shaped, particularly the semis. I just remember thinking like, oh, this is a problem that everybody has, and they've chosen to solve it in a different way. And I felt like I had seen German cars my whole life, right? And German automobiles. And then you go there and you're like, oh, they did it a little different, and it's just that simple. And I think then you end up in some place like, Vietnam or something, or, Iraq or whatever. And you're like, oh, they poop here too, but they just do it in a little different way or whatever it may be. Right? That's a really, really good way of looking at it. How much, I know you're very well read. In fact, short story to kind of digress here, Spear and Clover initially came out of an idea I had in a float tank from a rook. And this was maybe 2.5, 3 years ago. And you were the only person that I approached to partner with. I wanted to do a brick and mortar physical location. And I wanted part of that to be sort of a debate and like book club that would kind of inspire conversations. And you helped me to get it started. It never kind of left the launch pad, but that's how I felt about how much I thought about how well read you are and how kind of like open to a diversity of opinions and points of view. I thought that was really important. And so it's really great to have you on the show, in a kind of circuitous way of saying that. But have you read like Rolf Potts, or do you read a lot about travel?
It's funny you say that, because I think that if I had to say like 3 books that impacted my approach to travel, when I started, my concerns were logistic and safety, right?
Sure.
And then you start to get more comfortable with the idea of traveling, and it becomes a little bit more about philosophy. So to get comfortable with the idea of like just getting on a backpack and going somewhere with no reservations, like no place to sleep, I recommend the Rick Steves books, not the ones that are, by the way, this is for someone who's like trying to maybe like needs a confidence boost or whatever. Like, can I do this alone? The answer is yeah. How to do it, how to feel comfortable with it. Those Rick Steves books on how to travel, not like Rick Steves does Denmark and this is what he says to do. He has a couple books from the 70s and 80s from when he was younger about like the philosophy, how to pack, what types of money to bring, how to, recommendations on like, not how to book the flight, but like, should I go into here and out of here, to get that kind of thing, get the logistics hammered out. Any of the earlier Rick Steves books. A more fun one, just like a funny, lighthearted, like, oh man, I've been there. I know what it's like to, be in trouble abroad, is Do Travel Writers Go to Hell? Very good book. And it's about one of like back in the late 90s, like it was not one of the first, but like one of the Lonely Planet guys. Lonely Planet was a Bible for us back before internet and before smartphones. I started my travel journey like right before the internet was useful. And now with smartphones being ubiquitous, it's mind blowing how easy smartphones make traveling. If you hadn't had to do it before, I mean, it was rough out there before that. It was more romantic, and there's pros and cons to having the technology available, right? Like there's something to be said about getting lost, but it's also a bummer, right? So it's like the smartphones have made traveling so much easier. And there's pros and cons to that. Anyway, that book, Do Travels Right or Go to Hell? And I do forget the author, but that was a really fun one. And then, of course, Vagabonding to me by Ralph Potts is the 101 on like, about traveling slowly, about how to appreciate a place, about the things to do. I don't remember if it's from that book specifically, but one of the takeaways from that, or just my own experiences, or all of it together, you know how it mixes as a cocktail up there, is don't treat your trip or the place you're visiting like a grocery list or a to-do list. That's a big takeaway, right? Like, of course, if you're going to go to Paris, you want to see the Eiffel Tower, but you shouldn't have an Excel spreadsheet of what to do while you're there. Pretend that when you're visiting a place, lie to yourself and pretend and tell yourself you'll be back, because it gives you the permission to maybe skip the last museum because you're just tired, or there's no coffee and you have a headache and you just don't feel like it. It's okay to sit in the park and just enjoy the view. And that's like a big takeaway from the book Vagabonding. And I agree with it, obviously.
Yeah. And, I was not going to say this, but I just in the car was listening to a podcast and I heard a quote by Sadhguru, which is an Indian, guru guy. And he said, there are 3 lives. There's 3 dimensions to life. And it's, one is the past, one is the present, and one is your imagination or the future. And I think that's the same way with travel, right? If you can, you want to try and live sort of in the present. But you used the word romantic. And definitely when I think of Collin, I think a romantic for sure, and in a lot of different ways. For instance, not that long ago, I remember reaching out to you just randomly. Once in a while, I'll reach out. You're like, yeah, I went to Vermont to see the leaves change. And to me, I'm like, oh, yeah, that is, I never would have guessed that. But as soon as you said it, I'm like, oh, yeah, that's exactly something you would do. How often would you say you travel kind of in search of a feeling?
I think that over time, I touched on the idea that when you're younger, it's about smash and grab, about like adding to your list. And as you get older, it does become more about being in the moment and appreciating a place for what it is. So I would say how often? I'd say almost 100%, but that it was a long process. I started at like 10, like a moment like I'll never forget is one of my first time in Europe alone, like as a young person, 18 or 19. It's kind of intimidating, but it's so intoxicating. You meant when you were talking about getting off in Germany and seeing the buses being different, I was like, I know exactly what you're talking about. It's like this intoxicating feeling that you're like, I'm still on Earth, but like this is different. I was like a young person, and I was standing in the train station. Some train stations in Europe still do this, but this was a main one, like Berlin or something. And they still had the ticking of the destinations would every 20 minutes or whatever, the tick, 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 and all the destinations, the times would change. And I remember standing there and I felt like I just like took a drug or something. I was like, oh my God, I'm right here. I'm in Central Europe and I could be in any new city in 20 or, like I could be in any city tomorrow morning. I have my wallet and I don't have reservations tonight. I could just get on at any one of these trains and be in any place. And that I've been chasing that feeling forever. Yeah. Maybe it's like analogous to like a drug user, like trying to get that hit again. And maybe that's why as you travel, you end up going to more far-flung places, and because you're just trying to recreate that experience. But yeah, almost entirely based off of a feelings now, because I'll tell you what, like this trip I'm going on probably tomorrow to Europe, I'm not going to be like hitting museums. I'm not going to have my Rick Steves list of places to go. I mean, I'll probably have 1 or 2 places I want to see in Paris and in Luxembourg, but I'm going to walk. I'm going to like find the good cheese. I'm going to find the good chocolate, have a glass of wine. Hopefully the weather's nice, sit in the park and just absorb it. And I think that it is a privilege to be in that place. Because when I speak to people that are encouraged and want to travel a lot, I make sure that I give them the grace to fuck up their first couple trips, or right. I'm like, I'll look at it. I'll look at someone will be, hell, Collin, you're good at this stuff. Why don't you look at my itinerary and tell me what to do? I'll always look at it and be like, to myself, I'm like, you need to cut this in half. Whatever you think you're about to do. And then I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, okay, you're young. You're going to do this. You are going to spend one night in 7 cities in your week trip to Europe. You're going to be the whole time. You're going to be on trains or tired or sleeping. But I think you owe it to yourself to give it a shot. Try it, to do that, to try to collect as many passport stamps as you can before you kind of realize that you're robbing yourself of the opportunity to really feel the place.
Yeah, that's an interesting point you make. I mean, I think that very much like entrepreneurship, traveling in the way that you're talking about, which is like a very unique, not unique, but a very specific style of traveling. Have you ever seen it where a high anxiety person or somebody who just has to, type A personality, have you ever seen it where have you been able to help somebody to kind of relax a little bit and then eventually become, capable of chilling out a little bit? Because there's 20 people I could list for you that I've traveled with where it's like, that's just not happening. We're not staying in a hostel. We're not backpacking. We're not doing any of that stuff. We're not going to spend 14 days in X place and, fucking bar back at the local, bar or whatever. Have you ever seen somebody who didn't share your temperament in the way that you've gotten it kind of acquire it over time?
Yes, I actually all the time.
Great.
The challenge is
there's hope.
There's plenty of hope. I don't have any acute, dude, who wants advice real in life? Who wants
to? All of them do.
Do they?
So tell them what they need to hear.
Because I've seen people like do a 180 and go do exactly what they were going to do before they talk to me.
Sure.
Almost every time.
Yep.
So what I'm getting at is I think that self-discovery comes everyone's on their own path. I think everyone can achieve that, but the question is, are they going to see the world enough to get there? And another thing, I kind of hinted at this before. Look, traveling's not for everybody, and it sucks sometimes. And I think my cardinal sin, the problem I've had my entire life, is envy. I get very jealous. This is the worst thing. This is my worst trait. Huh. So I keep an eye on other people. I'm like, do not be jealous of the trips I'm going. You have a family, you have children. That is an entirely different path. That is an entirely different journey. You don't think, I think like going to Disney World with 2 kids, that's a special moment. That's a special week. I would hate for you to think that I'm looking down on whatever choices you've made with your free time and resources, that just because you're not going to Asia, right? Of course not. So, I encourage people to go on that journey on their own. So everyone can get there, but not everybody will. And a lot of that is just a matter of the world we live in and family, of course, like responsibilities and family structures and work. And things are changing in the American way we work and everything. And I'm digging it. I'm getting a lot out of it, as you can tell. But, it's a shame that within the American work culture, that it's not just that we don't get a lot of time off, because some of us do. So some people only get 1 or 2 weeks off a year. Now that's a shame, but it is what it is. Some people get 4 to 6. Okay. So depending on the company where it's run. Here's the problem with American work culture when it comes to time off, is this bullshit shaming that goes on when people do, because we can change that culture. Okay. What's happening with the pandemic and how that's changed where we work and how we work and what hours look like and what pay, that was them making changes because they had to. We can stop busting our coworkers' balls for taking 10 days off, because when you make someone else feel bad about going on their vacation, that boomerangs to you too. Mm-hmm. So we should be encouraging and helpful. Say, hey man, I know you're going for 2 weeks. I know that's a lot. I'll try to pick up some of the work while you're out and answer some of those emails so that I feel like I can take that time off too. Because unused PTO is the problem. I mean, anyone on 1 or 2 weeks off, that's a shame. You deserve more than that, in the way I view it. I don't understand why we've been accumulating resources in this country for the last 100 years if some of us aren't going to get some extra time off. What was the point of all this effort and all in getting us to the point where we're living with this high quality standard if we're not going to get time off? But the unused amount is, come on, right? That's the problem. That's a part of the problem.
It's really interesting. Okay, so talking about cultures, is there a culture that you've been in? Like, are you a afternoon siesta guy? Like, is there a culture you've visited or been in that you think that you most have enjoyed the way they live?
Okay, I'm going to get to the answer, and if I don't, please, hey, just give me an answer. What is your favorite country, right? So I have a lot of thoughts on that, and like what places are interesting and what cultures. Okay, so we have. After 1991, we basically have a world that's like pretty much all on the same page. So cultural differences, a lot of them are surface level until you get maybe to another continent. But consider like the cultural changes between, you drive a car from London to Greece, okay? That's a long drive, and you probably drive through 18 or 19 countries. And every border you cross, you're going to feel so excited because the languages are different. The food is different. What they drink is different. Where they drive is different. Like architecture is different. History is different. And it will feel intoxicating, and that will feel like massive cultural change, but it's pretty surface level. Ask any one of those people what they think about abortion, what they think about single payer healthcare, what they think about work-life balance, what they think about the stock market. And you're going to get very consistent answers along that drive. And that is saying something, because we have the opposite in this country. The cultural difference on a drive from Maine to, call it like, the Carolinas. Someone from abroad is not going to feel like a massive difference. Like, oh, you have barbecue down here. That's it. That's your difference. You eat lobster up there and barbecue down here. That's the big difference. Whereas politically, you're going to go through a spectrum that is crazy wide. You're going to have MAGA Maine in the middle of Maine. You're going to go to Portland. You're going to have the crazy liberal hippies. And you're going to, the political spectrum is very different in the United States. And it's a thing people don't consider or talk about. Someone from Greece is a lot more in common with someone from London than someone from New York City does with someone from Des Moines. And that's crazy, right? To think about, like at a value level, not at language and all that, at a value level. So where do you go that's like super different? Because we're at post 1991, the world is pretty much on the same page. Credit cards pretty much work everywhere. You know, everyone's playing the same game. And a lot of it has been driven by a Western expansion and our Western way of life. There are very few places you can go that are truly different. So let's talk about those. You've got the part of the world that is detached from the Western economic system, places like North Korea, Central Africa. So you've got that. That's a wildly different part of the world. And I think one of the more unique places in the world is Japan, because they have their own money, they have their own success, they drive a lot of technology, their standard of living is very high, but they never bent the knee to the West. Outside of, what happened after World War II, we wrote their constitution, I'm aware of all of that. I'm talking culturally. They've been isolated their entire existence, but they have a ton of money. So when you go there, they do things their way. And I'm telling you, it's different and it feels different. And that's an exciting place to be. So Japan's kind of part of my answer, because I think that we still have vice versa. We have a lot to learn from each other about the way they do business, the way they work, the way they treat their families. I am not saying it's all good. I'm saying that there's a lot of good over there and a lot of bad, just like anywhere. And we have a lot to learn from them. So Japan is one of the places where I felt most excited to learn and everything. Where I belong in Ireland or something like that, like, where I fit in and I look like everybody and they're all also named Collin and we all drink Guinness. Like, that's where I belong. But And I think there's plenty to learn there too. But I'm drawn to the few places left in the world where they don't do business like we do. Like, you go to Havana, you can't raise your hand and get a taxi because they don't have the infrastructure for that. That's not how they work. You raise your hand and you get in a shared group of cars that's like free. I'm not saying Cuba's a great place. They have, as you can imagine, many, many challenges, but it's intoxicating to be somewhere where the things are way different, where you can't just walk up to the grocery store and use your credit card. You have to learn how they operate and how they work. And I would challenge anyone that thinks that Cuba is a hellhole to also visit Haiti, which we would never talk about stuff like that. All we talk about is what a hellhole Venezuela is and Cuba and North Korea, because we're trying to vilify their way of life because we want to bring them into the Western world, good or bad. I'm not commenting on that. But they're very different places, right? So I don't know. I rambled a lot. Japan is an interesting place to visit because I think we have a lot to learn from. And anywhere outside that isn't plugged into the Western financial system that's travel, man. And before 1991, half the world was that way. You go to any countries of the Soviet Union were wildly different than the way we do business now. And that's traveling, man. I mean, that's visiting another planet almost.
Yeah. And, just to kind of backtrack a little bit, I do think there's a difference between London and Greece, and it's the way they approach work. So I'm surprised to hear you say Japan. I have not been to Japan, but my understanding is that it's like a whole different planet. It feels like, and that's very cool. The reason I'm surprised you said Japan, though, is my understanding is they work incredibly hard. Do they do much travel there? Is there much, I know their family units are very strong, but, maybe elaborate on that a little bit.
Sure. I don't want to speak to the culture too much because I was there for a week. Like, what do I know?
Yeah.
Well, I do back to like travel philosophy. When you're visiting a place, one thing I encourage people to do is to read a book about or that takes place in the place you're visiting while you're visiting it.
Cool.
Because I think viewing the place that you're visiting through the eyes of a native person via fiction is a good book. And there's resources online to find, the top 5 books to read while you're visiting Japan and why. You either get to learn about the history of a place from a really unique perspective and really digest it, or if it's more of a contemporary novel, to understand the place that you're visiting better. So I do that so even though, I've read a book or two and then I went to Japan, I was only there for a week. So I don't want to speak as an expert, but like some of the things that are just like, that are, at least I don't have answers for, that are very intriguing. They don't have trash cans there because they had a terrorist attack. I remember when it was in the news 10 or 20 years ago, they had like a not anthrax, but like some sort of attack.
Are you talking about the cult?
Yes,
there was a cult attack. It was
on the subway or whatever.
Yes, but I can't think of the name. Yeah,
okay.
it was widespread
overnight.
Too.
They said no more trash cans.
Wow.
Let's solve that problem. No more trash cans. There's not one single piece of trash anywhere on the ground in Japan. Okay, I don't understand that. I really don't. So what do we have to learn from their culture and how you can honor society and how you can work together better to live in a better world? I'm not saying that. And again, like in a lot of these homogenous countries that have things better than we do, that's a subjective conversation. I don't ascribe to that belief that like Norway is better than America. I think that it does something well and some things different. Japan is a very homogenous culture, and I know that a lot of it has to do with that, right? Like, look, it's an uncomfortable thing to discuss. But when when at a primal level, when everyone looks and acts like you, people tend to take care of their societies better. It just is what it is. You overlay a map of the world of the most homogenous countries in the world and overlap that with a map of the world showing which countries have single payer healthcare. It's basically the same. So these are things that are happening. I'm not prescribing merit to them or if that's good or bad, but that's one thing that makes Japan so interesting is it's the only like homogenous first world country left in the world. And I'm not saying that's good. I'm just saying it is what it is. So there's the component of their culture, like the way that they honor their society, they honor their families. I don't know if that's something that we could pick up, but I think that we owe it to ourselves to look at countries that are doing things better than us and try to learn from them. Mm-hmm. And Japan does a lot of things really well. Their work culture is garbage, in my opinion. It's like 80-hour, 90-hour work weeks where people I saw it. One thing that's interesting about Tokyo is when you're walking around, like Tokyo is like, I think the biggest city in the world. I walked for 6 hours in a straight line and never saw a building that was less than 20 stories. Wow. So the different parts of the cities represent entirely different cultures. So if you go to their like business district, like their downtown, their Wall Street, everyone looks like a character from Reservoir Dogs on the train, and everyone's walking around. You go to like the Nintendo district. I'm using layman's terms. I forget the names of these areas, but you go to the Nintendo district and everyone's dressed up like anime and everyone's like playing video games and arcade games at night, all night. I don't know. It's a very bizarre place. I don't want to represent myself as an expert. I just think there's things to learn from them.
Yeah, and I can see that. The other thing I would add is there's the geography and sort of socio-political background they come from, where it's like them versus China, them versus everybody, kind of. And you have this sort of I'm a drop of water in a larger river mentality. I'm not able to just pull the quote, the Sun Tzu stuff or whatever, but I know there's that Eastern philosophy of like the whole is greater than me, whereas in Western culture, it's all, particularly America, it's all about me separating myself from the river to be a beautiful snowflake or whatever metaphor would hold water there. And so I think that probably plays a role in it as well. But that's fascinating. There's definitely honor and duty, my understanding of that culture. Another person I love to hear talk about travel is Henry Rollins. And of course, there's other corollaries with you and Henry Rollins that we'll get to in a little bit. Love that guy. I've loved his spoken word since like the 90s when I was a kid. How much do you talk to people? He always talks about, going to these places and just having conversation with people where, he's like staying in people's houses. And have you done much of that? Do you experience your travels primarily, alone or with who you're traveling with? Or do you immerse yourself? Do you talk to folks? Do you get part-time jobs? How does that go for you?
It's changed over time. Like when I had more, because it's really about resources, time and money, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, can you travel and how long can you be there? And that is changed over time. I used to have a lot of time and no money, and now I have money and no time, right? So that's the challenge. So to like, how much do you immerse yourself in a place? That has been my dream. I was slated to join the Peace Corps. I was slated to teach English in Japan for a year, or South Korea. It was between the two. Not as much as I would like. And the difference between someone like me and Henry Rollins might have a similar worldview, but our access and our ability is entirely different. I do have to get home for work, so I can't grow tobacco with, in Nicaragua for 2 weeks just to understand it. Right.
Yeah.
But a couple tools that I have, because it's hard. Okay. So let's get that straight. It is hard to puncture the culture when you're somewhere it's not atypical to be in a city for only 3 days. And if it's a wonderful place like Berlin or Paris or whatever, the things that you want to do could take up the 3 days. So,
but before you go on, I want to stop you just for a second. Do you though sit down and have an hour and a half long conversation with a guy at a train station? Are you that kind of traveler? I'm just curious. Yeah. Because I think that's different, right? Do you do anything like that, or do you just kind of observe?
So my way of doing that, and this is just my way, is it good or bad, is to utilize some sort of travel infrastructure to speak to people that work in the space. So what I'll do is if I'm somewhere for a short period, I'll book a day walking tour to check out the architecture or whatever. And over that 4 hours, I'm beating that guy up with questions and talking and trying to. What ends up happening is, at least in my experience, is when you're traveling, you end up viewing the place you're with other travelers. It's just because you're in that infrastructure. And if you're young and trying to save money, maybe you're at a hostel, you might be spending your time in Greece with a guy from London because at least you guys speak the same language and you have the same objective. And I'm learning about his life experience. I'm learning about London, and we are learning about Greece. What is, again, not to overuse the word, this is romantic notion that if I go to Greece, I'm going to sit at a bar and someone's going to order ouzo next to me and we're going to hit it off and I'm going to learn all about Greece through this guy. Yeah. It's less likely, and it takes a lot of time. And that's usually something that we don't have when we're traveling, is the time to really absorb it and be in a place long enough to strike up that conversation. And a lot of the places you're visiting, unlike here, I remember being at a bar in Chicago and the guy sat down next to me and he's like, "Hey man, how are you? I'm from Australia and I'm just traveling across the country for the month." And I was like, "You sat next to the right guy, because I'm you." You know what I mean? I was like, "Here's a beer, let's talk. I'll give you a list of places or whatever." The likelihood of that happening abroad is a lot different. The reason I bring up that example is because that's happened to me once. And living in Chicago for over a decade, it's only happened to me once. If you're in Athens or wherever, in Prague, wherever bar you're at, that Czech guy has someone sitting next to him every day speaking English, and he's over it. So that's part of the challenge. So in order to have those cultural experiences, this is just my opinion, in order to have those cultural experiences and have them happen easily, you have to go to and be in destinations that aren't over visited. And that might not be in what you're wanting. It might not be what you want out of your 1 week vacations, to go to Cherbourg, France, instead of Paris, where everything you want to see is. So in those over visited areas, this is harder.
It's a really good answer. You're one of the only people I know, other than the friend of ours, Andrew, shout out to Andrew Resor, who has been to North Korea. Tell me about that.
I could go on, and I did write a lengthy piece about it.
Yeah, where can they find that? Why don't we just start right there?
That's all archived.
No, that's too bad.
I know. But yeah, Andrew's a friend of ours that I had met at the gym, and he's out in LA now. We see each other every morning working out, and we have a lot of bizarre similar interests. We were both kind of fascinated with the Cold War and fascinated with Asia in general. And Andrew had lived in Japan for a while, so he'd been exposed. We just had a lot in common. And my motivation at the time was I wanted to visit every country in the world. So that was that was baseline for me. So do you want to go somewhere? The answer is yes.
Yep.
Right. So that was the entry fee to that amusement park. I was I want to go to North Korea because I want to go to every country in the world. But also, I'm very fascinated with the Cold War, the collapse of the Soviet Union, and I'm very interested in places that are poised for change. So I got to visit during it being North Korea. It may not exist in 20 or 30 years. I don't know. I'm not commenting on that. But, a lot of the way I viewed travel for the last couple of years was, can I go to places that are going to be different, in my lifetime, so that I could look back and say, I was in North Korea before it was liberated. I got to do that experience. So him and I, we've talked about it a lot. We talked about it every morning, for a couple months. And we were like, are we going to do it? Let's just do it. So we booked the tour. A lot of people have a lot of the questions they get about North Korea are about the logistics. I can tell you, well, you can't go anymore. But at the time, it was a very easy process. It was actually really easy. It was one of the easier visas I have ever had. One of the more simple, not easy, but simple travel experiences. So again, Americans can't go anymore, but Andrew and I, we flew to Beijing and spent a day or two there just hanging out. And then Americans at the time were not allowed to take the train. So there's an overnight train. It takes like 20 hours from Beijing to Pyongyang. Most people entering the country do that, but for whatever reason, Americans were not allowed on that train. So Andrew and I flew. We booked this all gets booked through the North Korean government. You, as a Westerner wanting to visit, you book your tour through a Western tour company that directly links to the North Korea. Everyone's going on the same tour. Your minders come from the same pool of minders. Your buses all come from the same buses, whatever. So we knew that. And our objective was to find the cheapest tour because we knew that the product was the same. It was just like, what's the margin of the Western tour agency that's booking you? So we found the cheapest tours, Young Pioneer Tours. I've been on several tours with them since. They specialize in bizarre places, ex-Soviet countries, things like that. So we can talk about all of that experience too, because that's hot in the news right now. The other tours I've been on with them. We fly to the only 1-star rated airline in the world. They're not allowed to fly over the sea of Korea. They're not allowed to fly over water because they only have 1 star. So they fly. So we flew that whole experience, like boarding this North Korean plane. Yeah, I mean, it's cool. It's really exciting. There are propaganda cartoons on the plane. Like, there's a whole experience. Worst chicken sandwich I ever tasted. And then we land, and then we were there for a full week of guided tours of the city. So we got to see almost the entirety of Pyongyang. We went to the DMZ, which was my least favorite part of the tour, but it was interesting to be on this side of it when you see Western tourists on the South Korean side looking at you being like, whoa, I had like a shirt that was like Cleveland, Ohio. Like, they're like, whoa, so that was it. And then the only city in North Korea that predates 50s, the US bombing campaigns, there's only one city left in North Korea, and it's called Kaesong. And we got to visit that place and see what Korea looked like before the war. It's the only place that you can do. So that was the tour, and Andrew and I got along great. We had a really good time. We were paired with an Australian minder. That's how it works. You get paired with your Western minder, and then we had 2 North Korean minders. And I think there were only about 7 of us on the tour. And people ask, like, what was the structure of the tour? What was what was it like? And it's a very difficult trip to explain without sounding coy. So someone will be like, well, do they have bars there? And I'm like, yeah, that's the answer. Yes, they do. But like, it doesn't work the way you think it works or whatever. When you get there, you're on an island, literally, that's where the hotel is, on an island you can't get off of, or you're on like a metaphorical island of, pre-approved routes and pre-approved destinations where those employees are the employees that you're visiting, the hotel you're visiting, or the restaurant, or the tourism site or whatever is manned by people that are exposed to Western tourists. I forget the numbers. I think something like 20,000 non-Koreans visit every year. I don't want to, but it's a very few Western people visit every year. Their primary tourism market is Chinese people. And the primary reason they come to North Korea, that I've been told from them, the hotel was full of Chinese people, and then like 8 or 9 of us Western tourists in the hotel. They said that one of the reasons they visit North Korea is to show their children the world that they grew up in. Because before the 80s and 90s, China looked like North Korea a lot, had a lot of similarities. So that's one of the reasons that Chinese people bring their children to North Korea, is to show them what life used to be like, which is interesting in its own way. I also imagine for them it's cheaper than China, so they come and get to, and they obviously go on different types of tours or whatever. But yeah, you're very well minded. You can't really walk off on your own. The hotel there is designed to keep you entertained for the time. That's another thing that people don't understand is when you're visiting North Korea, these minders that you're paired with, they're also tour guides. They also want you to have a good time. They also want you to leave with a good impression of the country. People would say, like, are they robots? Like, did they just give you canned answers to everything? And the answer is sort of the 2 guides we had. One, they were both children of North Korean diplomats. Lee had been to 50 countries. I mean, these are not like behind the Iron Curtain. Oh my gosh, well, it's Coca-Cola. Like, he had lived in Spain for years, and she had lived in Kuala Lumpur for years. Wow. So these are people that were exposed to they know the way the world works. So Or do they give canned answers and stuff? Yeah, but they're people, and you can tell, you can have a real conversation with them. If they start to feel uncomfortable because you're being a dick, because that's the thing that people do. They go there and they make the minders uncomfortable because they think they're doing some sort of like good for the world. I'm like, no, you're just making this person uncomfortable by pressing them on something that they're clearly uncomfortable answering. Like, why can't I take a photo of that? Oh, because you can't. Done. I'm a guest in your country. You got it. Thanks for having me, right? But I've seen like interviews, or I've seen like YouTube clips of other people going that are pressed like, do you really think that Kim Jong-il shot 15 hole-in-ones? Do you? And they're like, yeah, and it's like, well, so why would you press them on that? You can tell they're uncomfortable. So that was the experience with the minders, that they understand the Western world and that they're good tour guides and they want you to have fun. The other thing that surprises a lot, they drink a lot. The whole country drinks a lot. So they actually have pretty good beer. They had some, but not on the tour we were on, was technically a culinary tour. So we got to go behind the scenes and see how food was made in the kitchen. By the way, food was fantastic. And I know you could get some pushback on what that means. Right. But the food, because again, they want you to have a really good time. Anthony Bourdain can eat his heart out. He never went. There's a cold noodle soup place in Pyongyang that is supposed to be the best. They say that the people in the South talk about it like, oh, it's too bad that this cold noodle soup restaurant was on the other side of the DMZ, because we wish you could go. And I got to go. So the food's really good. They want you to have a good time. But yeah, it's a very bizarre trip. Last thing I'd say about North Korea is it is the only time in my life, or your life, or anyone that gets to go, where you will experience being treated at a more diplomatic level. Right. So I'll never get to know what it's like to go to Mozambique and be treated like the American ambassador to that country. Right. But when you go to North Korea, you're tapping into their government infrastructure, government minders, government everything. You're taken around in cars specifically to limits. I got to meet. And these people were like Bond villains, because it was like when we were there, like the other people that were visiting, the other like non-Chinese visitors that we got to meet at this one show where the children do the gymnastics and stuff. They were like diplomats and ambassadors from like these diabolical places. Like, you know what I mean? Like I got such a kick out of it. I was like, who is that guy? They're like, oh, that's the UN ambassador to Congo. And I was like, okay, like, so you guys all get along, right? It's like separate, diplomatic relations. Anyway, good trip. Can't go anymore. I think I've spoken plenty about it, unless you have any other questions on North Korea.
Today's show is brought to you by HighLevel CRM. HighLevel is an all-in-one platform designed to help entrepreneurs grow their businesses without the need for multiple softwares or an IT team. Not only does their easy-to-use software allow you to track and manage your leads throughout each phase of the relationship, but it also allows you to build funnels, track stats, and more. Guys, I sat down and added up the cost of software I was able to replace with just one app, and it was over $1,000 per month. Because this is an all-in-one application, I also save a ton of headaches connecting apps and building automations, and the team at Go HighLevel does a great job of getting you started quickly and easily when you sign on. I cannot more highly recommend these guys. Right now, Spear and Clover listeners get a free 14-day trial of HighLevel CRM for themselves. Click the link in our show notes to support the show and get started on your free 14-day trial today. I'm super excited that today's show is brought to you by the Global School of Entrepreneurship. Most practicing entrepreneurs cannot take 2 years away from their growing business to attend a full-time campus-based program or spend every weekend away from family and business for a couple of years. Finally, there's an accredited program specifically designed for you to work on and grow your business while completing your MBA. The GSE MBA complements the needs and schedules of someone actively engaged in an entrepreneurial venture while still covering the accredited curriculum expected from any MBA program. The Global School of Entrepreneurship offers a unique offering called the Mastermind to MBA program. It consists of 10 students who work together in a forum-style cohort and meet every other week for a year. The GSE MBA helps you develop skills in critical thinking and strategic planning. Students also develop competencies in leadership, decision-making, and communication with both employees as well as the important stakeholders in your business. You will be exposed to world-class academics and fascinating guest lecturers. You'll work on your business while working in your business. Students are guided by real-world entrepreneurs with decades of experience starting and scaling businesses just like yours. Best of all, I'm beyond proud to announce that the Global School of Entrepreneurship has agreed to offer one Spear and Clover listener a scholarship to join an upcoming Mastermind to MBA cohort. They are looking for someone just like you to bring a unique perspective to the program, and they are accepting applications right now. To learn more and to apply, simply go to www.gse.mba/spear. That's www.gse.mba/spear. Don't miss this opportunity to level yourself up and surround yourself with other like-minded entrepreneurs just like you. Once again, to apply for the GSE MBA Spear and Clover Scholarship, simply visit www.gse.mba/spear. That's www.gse.mba/spear. Today's show is brought to you by Scaling with Media. I mean, literally, like if it weren't for the folks at Scaling with Media, you would not be getting this. Scaling with Media is a truly revolutionary company for any entrepreneur who wants to reach a larger audience without taking on the years of experience necessary to master the required skills. These guys do it all. From helping you develop your creative plan to editing, sourcing content, copywriting, ads management, and way more. Whether you're looking to launch a YouTube channel or podcast, or you just want to scale your business out to more eyeballs, these guys are the absolute best one-stop shop. But that's not all. Right now, Spear and Clover listeners who sign up for their brand launch package will receive a free, that's right, free professional grade studio kit that I'm actually recording right now on. The studio kit includes a professional microphone, stand, lighting, and headphones, and is worth well over $500. Take action now by going to scalingwithmedia.com/spear and claim your free studio kit. Again, that's scalingwithmedia.com/spear, scalingwithmedia.com/spear. Now back to the show. Yeah, the only other question I have about North Korea is or not really even a question, more of a statement for reaction. Like, I remember you describing it going to a restaurant and it was like nobody in the restaurant had ever been in a restaurant before. Is that you that told me that? I think it was.
Yeah, I mean, I may have said that, but you hear that feedback a lot.
Yeah.
That like we would go to a restaurant that could seat like 180 people and we would be the only ones there.
Yeah.
Stuff like that. Look, I hope that this didn't come across as me like sugarcoating the regime or whatever. Like North Korea has a lot of problems, probably more than anywhere else in the world. If hell exists, I think it's in North Korea. I think it's the worst place on the planet. So let me just comment on that piece, because this is a lot of pushback I get from people, and it touches on my beliefs in terms of travel, but also free trade. So people don't think of tourism as traditional trade, but from an economic perspective, it is. You're taking money. If I buy a baguette in Paris, economically, that's not different than me ordering it from the United States and paying in USD and having it shipped to me. From an economic perspective, there's trade going on. I'm exchanging USD for French goods. That's trade. So traveling is trade. Mm-hmm. And I am of the belief that free trade is what and why the world is the way that it is, which is last week, with the exclusion of last week, we have lived an entire generation of nearly conflict-free environment. And I know that's a Eurocentric worldview because I'm aware of the challenges that have happened in Central America and Central Africa and all of that. I'm just saying from a global perspective. Middle East. Well, yeah, I've heard they had problems. Like, and I heard you might know about that. But from a global. By the way, I'm not dismissing any time over there. I have friends over there that didn't come back. It's yada yada. But death from sickness, death from war, death from famine, all of these things are lower than ever. Human population is higher than ever, and unfortunate deaths and sicknesses and war and all the horrible things from the first half of the 20th century was a rough go. That second half looked a lot better, is my point, right? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So, and I attribute a lot of that to the speed of communications, technologies, but also free trade. Mm-hmm. It's a lot. We're witnessing what's happening in Russia, how hard it is to engage in conflict when the world doesn't agree with you. And a lot of it is because of the technologies and the free trade. We'll cut you off the SWIFT banking system. Good luck, kid. Right. So a lot of the reason we get along, I ascribe to free trade and communication and knowing people. It's pretty hard. I'm not saying this isn't going to happen because I don't know what's going to happen in the next couple of weeks, but it's hard to go to war with China when we buy all their shit. They need all our money. And a lot of our C-suites and a lot of our leaders and execs know people in China. Like it's harder to engage in conflict when you know someone. So I would propose that sanctions on non-first or second world nations actually lead to more conflict. So why is it that Cuba's really the only communist country left? I would argue a part of it is because of the embargo, ironically, because they're not getting the goods that they want or need. They're able to blame the United States. They're able to blame the Western world, and their leadership isn't wanting. The leadership still gets what they want. You may have had experiences with that in the Middle East, like sanctions in Iraq. What does that look like? It looks like Saddam Hussein still has a gold AK-47 and children don't get medicine. So that's a long way to get to my feelings on visiting a place like North Korea. Aren't you just funding the regime? It's a fair question.
Yeah.
My answer is a little bit. But what's the net good? People don't know this, but outside of Kaesong is a South Korean factory where they pump millions of South Korean currency into the North Korean government because they want the slave labor. They're cool with the slave labor. And so they're pumping millions of dollars into the North Korean economy. They're funding the regime through literal slavery. Is the $1,800 I spent to go there and fly there and eat a horrible chicken sandwich, was that good? Did I tip the point? Or did me being there tipping the workers in USD or in won? Or we went to a carnival while we were there where all North Korean Boy Scouts, they're called Young Pioneers, but they have the very similar like it's a very similar program. We went go-karting with them, and I brought a bunch of candy to hand out to them, and I learned their motto and I learned their thing, and I said, and I said Hong Shot Chubi, and I remember them looking at me like, the Scouts honor, like, we were handing out candy, we were doing that. I'm not trying to say we're doing the Lord's work here, but I'm saying it's a lot harder for that kid who sat in that car with me and got candy and heard me say the slogan. It's a lot harder for him to look at the propaganda that shows a white guy stepping on it. The propaganda in North Korea it's good. They got, it's so good. They got billboards with like American troops like shooting babies and stuff. It is artisanal propaganda. It's a lot harder for that kid to believe that story, right? Because he's like, I don't know, man. The ones I meet give me candy, and I'm just saying, there's a lot more to it than just the $1,800 I gave to Kim Jong Il. I mean, did I? I think there's a lot more to it, and I think that free trade is a way out for those people. The reason the Soviet Union fell, my opinion, is free trade. They saw MTV, they saw Blue Jeans, they wanted those things. They saw how much better life was in the Western world, and they revolted. We did not defeat the Soviet Union. The citizens of those countries defeated the Soviet Union, and they did that because they wanted more. I don't know how you get people to do that if they live in a world where the sanctions imposed on them can be blamed on you and the leaders don't feel any of that pain.
That's so interesting. And you raised another good point. My follow-up question was going to be, so to paint the picture, we can only see your upper body, but Collin's a state champion strongman formerly. Andrew's 6'5" or something like. So you two are going through town, and anybody has to assume you're like a Delta Force operator or something like that, right? Like they have to think. Yeah, I mean, you certainly looked like it. What's your 650-pound deadlift or something like that? Like retired. I hear you.
At the time,
allow me to toot your horn. Yeah, you guys are monsters.
Andrew's over there. Huge.
Yeah,
right. So Andrew's like 6'5" or 6.
Yeah. He's a big boy. Yeah.
So, I'm the meatball. We look like the number 10, like walking around, right? Like I'm the meatball, and he's not skinny either. Like he's a healthy, muscular dude. We went to, so here's a fun story from North Korea. There is no flexibility, right? No flexibility to the tour. But I was like, guys, I really like weightlifting, and you have the best weightlifter in the world. They did at the time. And I was like, I would love to meet him. And they were, I brought it up all week. And towards the end of the week, they were like, okay, listen, we'll drive you down to our Colorado Springs, right? They have their Olympic training facility.
OTC, yeah.
And it was awesome. It was like a main street. It was very, I don't know, it's not brutalism, but it's just like this Soviet type of architecture. When you think of Moscow, you
monolithic kind of.
Monolithic, right? Yeah. So there's this street with all these monolithic buildings far apart. And outside, like on the street, outside of each one was just like a sign with the Olympic symbol for that sport. So we got to go down their street of, their Olympic training centers. And they took us to the weightlifting one.
Wow.
And we get to watch a little bit. Because again, it's not even like there's anything wrong. They just hate change. They just hate anything not being planned. But as a part of that detour, there was no one at the shooting facility. So they, the rifles and pistols and all that's those sports, archery, all is in the same complex. They took us there and they gave us a run. We got to like shoot some of the guns, shoot some of the stuff. We did all that. Me and Andrew did really well the shooting. We had a bet going with our guide who was conscripted North Korean service. We beat him at target practice. It was very uncomfortable. It was the last day and he looked at us and he's like, you guys are special forces. And we're like, oh shit. And he didn't talk to us for like the rest. It was the last day. He didn't talk to me until I left. He was upset. I guess that might be like part of their culture.
You got to pull your punches, bro. Come on.
Wasn't occurring as
it's that arrogance from America you boys had. You couldn't help but shoot a penny out of the sky. Yeah. That is so funny.
That's funny.
And so you alluded to this a little bit. Actually, I did have one follow-up that I wanted to get to. You mentioned free trade. Do you think that communism has a place within a globe of free trade? And I know that, obviously China is an answer to that, but not really, right?
Communism doesn't really work. It would lose the Cold War again. Now, you want to talk like heady talk, like could communism work at a global level? The way I always looked at it was money and the economy and the way humans work in groups, the way money works in groups at a macro level is analogous to a river. Right? The river is going to flow that way. And if you're not in Chicago, you can't make it flow that way. But rivers also flood. They go dry. They also have problems. So it helps to have locks and some sort of infrastructure in place to make sure that that everyone's getting water and that it can flow effectively and across different seasons. That's my view of what a structure to capitalism is. I think capitalism is a failure too. We don't live in a capitalist society. But communism is trying to make the river flow the other way. It's trying to fight human nature. It stifles innovation. It stifles creative thought. It isn't responsible for all of the things I talked about like 15, 20 minutes ago, the increase in the decrease in infant mortality, death from illness, sickness, famine, and war. Communism isn't responsible for the increase in the increase in quality of life that we have. Capitalism is, but this more structured lock system that I'm describing but by the way, it's just an opinion, is a better way.
It's one of the more erudite and European description of effective capitalism I've heard. I like it, man. So you also alluded to Eastern Bloc countries, specifically Ukraine. So as we record this, we're 12 days in on Russia invading Ukraine. And it's my understanding you've been there 3 times. Maybe tell us a little bit about that country. And have you been to Russia as well?
Yeah, as a part of the same trip. Yeah, I went independently in like 2005, maybe. Mm-hmm. I traveled from Finland to overland. So that's another thing. I really like overland travel. I really think that's like, unless you have to fly, I think overland trains mostly is my favorite, right? Or ride sharing, if you can do it, not Uber and Lyft. Like in Europe, they have these like ride share systems where you can like say, hey, is anyone going to Belgium? I'll go with you. I'll give you $40 and hop in your car. Cool. Back to the point of like meeting people and talking and learning. That's a fantastic way to do. You're stuck in a car for 5 hours with a guy. So I was traveling overland roughly from St. Petersburg through all of Ukraine and into Poland. That was just a trip when I was younger. One of the first Americans to go to Ukraine visa free, with no visa. Ukraine for a long time required a travel visa, as Russia does. So I had the Russian visa, and then I was like one of the first, like the first summer that the Ukraine wasn't requiring it. And I traveled overland, St. Petersburg, Moscow, some of the other parts of Russia, and into Ukraine. And that trip really left an impact on me. And Ukraine became one of my favorite places to visit. A lot of it is because of the amount of change that they're going through. Frankly, a lot of it is how affordable it is, because at the time, cost was a primary prohibitor for me to enjoy a place. So if you're in Paris and you're 20 and the escargot is 40 euro, you're going to say no. And I think you should, but you're also kind of robbing yourself of part of that experience, a part of the experience of being in a place like that. And Ukraine is and was and will forever be the cheapest place I've ever visited. Vietnam, nowhere compares to how affordable Ukraine is to the US dollar. Wow. It is the only time in my life I ever had that moment where Americans who haven't traveled think like, oh, the dollar's so strong in this place. That's bullshit. Like that went away in like 98 when the euro came out. Like the American dollar is not like lingua franca that many places. Well, Ukraine, I mean, I steak dinner and a beer, $7. Like, so I spent some time over there. I spent some time in rural Ukraine. I guess what it tapped into for me was what I thought Europe was going to be like when I first went. My impression of what Europe was, but this was before the internet was ubiquitous and before you could just like YouTube travel channel and stuff like that. My thoughts on what Europe were like stories from my dad's time over there in the service in the 60s and European Vacation with Chevy Chase. It's a horrible movie, but like, that's what I thought Europe was like. It's like so different and all that. Ukraine is like that. I mean, like they're like, and I don't mean to be insulting, but like they're behind on music, they're behind on fashion. It's really affordable. Like it tapped into that like fantasy that like I'm an American and it matters. So I enjoyed my time there, and I went back once or twice to speak to what's happening politically right now. That the one of the last time I went was by far the most interesting because it was with the same people that took me to North Korea. So the theme of that trip was Cold War, Soviet Union type themed things. So on that trip to Ukraine, like the things that really speak to the time we're living through right now was we spent 2 or 3 days in Chernobyl. We visited and not an abandoned, but a decommissioned nuclear silo. And we got to see where we got to go down into the silo. It's 12 stories underground. And we learned all about how they manned these are ICBM solos aimed at Chicago, man. I mean, it's a very sobering experience. You got to see all of the defunct equipment. We got to go down and go through a mock launch. You get to like pick your 12 missiles and go through a mock launch. He turned the key. I had to turn the key. We got to go to see where they lived. I mean, the way they lived, and this is crazy, man. None of the people that worked that silo are alive. It was only decommissioned in 1995. They're not alive because of how hard it is to live underground that long. They did some fucked up things to their own soldiers. I mean, they still do. That's another thing. Quality of life. Like when you visit some places that don't have they don't value life the same way we do. That's sobering. I mean, you look at old like Soviet like invasion plans for Europe. It was basically like, let everybody die, but
it's a zombie movie.
We'll get France, right? Just send more bodies. So the way they treated their own soldiers, anyway, the experiencing the going down into the ICBM is very sobering. So it's like, this is really touching on like a part of history that we lived through, but maybe don't remember as well. I mean, I think the fact that we were alive during apartheid and during the Berlin Wall, I think that's fucking insane that we're living this life right now, having the Zoom right now. And in living memory, though, that was the world that existed when we were born. So we did the silo. We went and spent some time in Odessa. So I've been to a lot of the places that you're seeing in the news right now. And I have photos of me standing in some of these squares. And I have photos of me having dinner with some of these people. I'm sounding like excited because I really get excited about talking about travel, but it has been an emotional 10 days for me to watch this, and I'm very unhappy with what's going on. And then we went from Odessa to what is one of the more fascinating parts of the world, which is an unrecognized country called Transnistria. And Transnistria is the history is pretty interesting. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, what not a lot of people know, and it's becoming really like, it's an underlying theme to what you're seeing in the news right now, but not a ton of people are talking about it specifically. So when Russia colonized the 12 or so nations that were part of the Soviet Union, they actively and aggressively colonized those places with European Russians. So don't forget, Kazakhstan was part of the Soviet Union, but a Kazakh person looks nothing like Vladimir Putin.
Right.
So a lot of these places, they aggressively, they had like incentives and farming incentives, and they would let you leave the collective farm if you were willing to move to Georgia. So when the Soviet Union collapsed, those Russian populations kind of like didn't know what to do. And 4 of them formed their own little like countries. 3 of those are in Georgia, and 1 is this sliver of land between Moldova and Ukraine called Transnistria. It was also home to the largest ammunition caches that the Soviets had, because it was right on the border of, it was in a strategic position to defend or offensively invade Western Europe. So it was home to all these things. So when they declared independence, everyone was like, okay, okay, we're like, there was a war, but it was very short lived. And they're like, fuck it. They've got caves of munitions. Like, just forget it. Part of the tour was we visited this place and we spent a couple of days in Transnistria. We and that's where I wish the English language had more words for the word friend, because I wouldn't describe the people that I know in Transnistria as friends, because we don't talk that much anymore. But these are people that I care about and shared meals with, and I'm thinking of right now. Transnistria is declared independence in 1992, I think, and it's about a population of about 450,000. And what's fascinating about it is the countryest country that's not a country. Like, they have their own post office, they have their own border patrol, they have their own passport, they have their own taxes, they have a conscriptive military, which is insane, because that means you're serving 2 years in a military that no one recognizes exists. Like, what do you get for that? And their economy is based largely on slowly cannibalizing their military arsenal, and like one of the best cognac distilleries in Europe, because Moldova is famous for shitty wine. Making cognac in that part of the world is the thing. So got to spend some time there. They declare themselves independent. There are 4,000 Russian troops stationed there all the time. So when Lukashenko just like released that photo of him with the map, and everyone's like, oh my God, are those invasion plans for Moldova? I was like, I don't think so. I think that's just them highlighting where they already have Russian troops. Maybe they want a land link between Odessa and Transnistria. That would make logistics sense. But that part of Ukraine and part of Moldova is already Russian occupied and probably prepared for some sort of invasion if they need to assist in what's going on in Ukraine right now. Like I said, I've been in some of these places and stood in some of these places. And weirdly, I coincidentally also walked from Lviv to Przemyśl, Poland. I did. And that's the route that people are walking to escape the country now. That's where the refugees are escaping to the west. And that is where the arms and humanitarian aid is coming in from the east. And it's just weird to, you can imagine. I'm seeing it on the news. And like, I know it's just crazy. And it's horribly sad, but like no one needs my thoughts or comments on what I think of the political situation or what I think of the war itself. I mean, I'm well informed on this part of the world. I'm well informed on the conflict, but I don't think that my opinion is hyper unique or useful, really.
Yeah. Reacting to that a little bit, what is your take on when you go to a place like Russia, when you go to Russia, and then you go to a former Iron Curtain place, how much does it feel like Russia? Like, how much did they stifle out the culture that was there? And then seeing as it was many years after the fall of communism, how much of that do you see returning? And what's your take on that?
Ukraine's really the only one that is kind of stuck in the same boat as Russia, culturally, economically, politically. It's kind of stuck. Part of the reason this conflict is happening is because over the past couple of years, I have a knack for going when they're in trouble. I've been there for both of their revolutions, unless I just happened to be there at the time of both their most recent revolutions. This is probably not news to anybody if you're following the conflict, but the western part of Ukraine is pro-Western, and they're more Western. They're some of them are ethnically Polish or Hungarian or whatever. They just identify with Western Europe more, and Eastern Europe is both ethnically, linguistically, and politically more aligned with the East. And until recently, their leadership was more. Their relationship with Russia was more like Belarus, where they were more of a puppet state to Russia. They were compliant with trade. They helped with the pipeline. Ukraine is in a challenging position, just like Poland is, where they're right in the middle of the two strongest powers in the world, Western Europe and Russia. So Ukraine is the answer. The other post-Soviet countries, so the countries within the Warsaw Pact are better off because they were never part of the Soviet Union. And then the post-Soviet countries that joined NATO are better off too, and a lot of them have started joining the European Union, which I to empathize with the people in the position of there. I don't know if you're a Ukrainian citizen and you're like, hey, Romania used to be a hellhole too, still kind of is, but it used to be just like us, and over the past 20 years their GDP has gone up 7 times. Why wouldn't I want that? Why wouldn't I want a new washing machine? Why am I stuck in this Russian shit? So that's the young people are looking towards NATO, looking towards the West, and that's the world they want to be in. And those are the leaders that they're electing. That's a huge background cause of this conflict. Is this might be the last chance whether or not it works or how it's going, perhaps their leadership saw this as one of the last chances to capture Ukraine as a vassal state. And of all of the former Soviet republics, Ukraine is economically the most viable and useful. It gives you access to the Black Sea directly.
I was going to say the geography too is a really
geography,
big factor,
and it's east meets west. All the pipelines and the trains, and it's the breadbasket of Europe. I mean, they make more food there than I think anywhere else in that part of the world. I mean, we obviously make a ton of food here, but that Ukraine has history. That's why it's always been a part of conflict. I mean, it's a cursed place. The history of Ukraine is brutal and bloody and sad, and it's not over. So they want to join them. You know what I mean? That they want this to be over. And I will see what happens. Obviously, I am not optimistic about outcomes here.
Yeah, I certainly hope that things go well. One thing I would point out is my time in Europe, we had high-speed internet. Most of your time in Europe, we had high-speed internet. We didn't have TikTok. We didn't have, Instagram to the level that we do now. I think Facebook existed when I was there, but, they certainly didn't, most Germans weren't on it, that I was aware of. And so I think that, like you see now these viral videos of Ukrainian soldiers like dancing and, girls in bomb shelters, trying to get a booty shot in or whatever. It's just so interesting to see that in a modern European war that clearly is currently holding its punches. And I really hope either continues to at least hold its punches or stops, because, I don't buy into the fact that Russia is legitimately being held back in earnest. I think they're trying to do this kind of with some hands tied behind their back.
Remember what their objective is.
Right.
They want a vassal state. They
Right.
don't want a crippled economy. They don't want to cripple the country. They could, right? Like when we defeated the South, one of the drawbacks was we cut all the rail lines, we cut everything. So we had to rebuild everything. They're trying to avoid that. My guess is that's why they're pulling their punches there. Yeah, I have tons of thoughts. I just don't think that they're unique or anything like that you're not already hearing from like reliable news sources. I spent a lot of time thinking about our news sources and how they work and how they deliver information. And I'm not going to make an opinion on anything. I will just say that the 24-hour news cycle is poised to work during conflict. It's actually like the 24-hour news cycle was born out of conflict, out of the desire for Europeans and Americans to understand what was going on in Bosnia. And it's suited for conflict because shit's always changing. There's tons of there's tons of people with valuable opinions. You turn on the news now, the quality of the news is high compared to before this, because how do you fill 24 hours of bullshit news? By getting people fired up and about now it's like, hey, there's this conflict up here. Let's get the French ambassador to the United States to comment on their arms deal. I'm like, that's all right. Now we're talking. Like, that's really good news. So to that point, I'm not going to comment on who I think is the best. I just think that CNN this is the foundation of what they do. And it seems like they're doing a good job of exposing their viewers to a lot of different people and a lot of different thoughts and world and just opinions and information. It just seems like they're doing a good job.
Wouldn't it be great if we had, really great 24-hour news cycles in times of peril? And not in other times when they're manufacturing it and da-da-da-da.
I know.
So moving on a little bit, just out of personal curiosity, have you spent any time in like Africa or I'm just curious where you've been that maybe most people listening maybe don't even know anybody aside from North Korea. I don't even know anybody who's been there. Have you been to Africa? Have you been to any,
the places I've been in Africa are the places that everyone's been.
South Africa and Egypt.
I would say the most Namibia is like one of the places I've been that not everyone has been, but Namibia is on the Gringo Trail, man. Like it is well visited and well toured, but it's an interesting place. It's the second least densely populated place in the world. So Mongolia is number one, and then Namibia is number two. And the only time, so you can drive for 24 hours and not see anything, like no rest stop, no nothing. So to overland through Africa, it has to be done through overlanding companies, unless you're really intrepid. I did run into families that were, driving from Cape Town to Cairo. It can be done on your own, but you have to be well trained and well suited and well geared for it. So we did some overland traveling through Namibia. So yeah, South Africa, we rode from Cape Town to Windhoek, and all of my experiences in Africa, when you think of Africa, you're thinking about Africa, not, I know Egypt's in Africa, but it's not what that's typically you're thinking about. the safaris and all that. It's not, and I climbed Kilimanjaro too. So I guess I've been to Tanzania too. So
I hear a couple of gringos went up there too.
Yeah, I ran into some other people there too. Yeah. Africa as a place is the people are drawn to it because of the natural beauty, the animals and the scenery and those types of experiences. And those types of experiences don't speak to me as much. I'm more into architecture, culture, food, linguistic differences, things like that. It's not to say that Africa doesn't have that, right? But imagine driving for 27 hours to get to the next town. You're like, shit, that was a lot of time. A lot of this trip was just bouncing around in a truck through the Namibian desert to get to the next town, which the point of visiting that town was to see this beautiful waterfall or this beautiful canyon, but none of it was interacting with people or learning about the culture or trying any unique cuisines. I mean, just camping a lot. So I probably will revisit Africa in the future, but it's not my favorite.
Francis Ngannou, who's the heavyweight champion of the UFC, walked from Cameroon through the the Sahara Desert and essentially crossed a small strait to get into France. But it took him like 7 or 8 times. He's on Rogan. He tells his whole story, and they just kept shipping him. They would basically take him back to the other side of the Sahara, and he'd walk back through it like 7 times or something crazy. And he's a fucking monster. So listen, I also want to dive into a couple of things. One, strongman and sort of iron life culture, which I think, you're, no offense, but you're not the strongest person I've ever met. You're certainly not a professional athlete, but mentally, somebody that buys into like this iron life, what's that magazine you always had? The little books.
Oh, Iron Mind.
Iron Mind. That's what I meant to say. Iron Mind. I really would like to talk about that. I would really like to talk about philosophy combined with sport and with training. I think that's another podcast, though. We're already at 1 hour 45. I think this flows really well. I think this is a really, really interesting conversation. There's 2 questions that I ask everybody that comes on the show. They're usually to entrepreneurs, so I'm going to see if I can format them for you. The question I normally ask is, if you had access to unlimited funds, how would you profitably grow your business? We're going to change that. We're going to say, if you had access to unlimited funds, how would you responsibly allocate that towards seeing more of the world?
So the true answer is that I would just travel more, right?
Just like
selfishly.
Yeah.
But I have felt pressure upon myself to use the skill sets I have. I do live a relatively selfish existence. I'm self-aware of that. I have always tried to pressure myself to use either the skills or the passions I have in life. How can I help other people with that? And I had always wanted to start this business that it would never be profitable. So to the point, how would I use unlimited funds to travel and in a more philanthropic way? So if you're familiar with Cuba, I think it's Cuba, is the non-interest bearing loans to the third world. So it's basically, I set up accounts and I donate money to people in the third world that interest free so that they can start their own entrepreneurial adventures. A lot of them are things that you would think of. They're like small coffee farmers that want to buy a plow, or seamstresses in Africa that need better sewing equipment. And so the loans are small. So it's $100 to $700. That's it, right? But to them, that's an interest-free loan. I'm donating the time, right? I'm just donating the time value of the money, which isn't a lot. But so I'm not really even giving a lot, and I'm helping a lot. So what I would do is I would set up a business where it's a lot more structured and a lot more intimate, where you would gather 8 to 10 people, and you would all sponsor someone's business. And then a year later, we would design a tour for that group to visit that country, do fun stuff, but also visit the farm, see the impact that you had, help in other ways, so that you're pairing some sort of philanthropic adventure with a cultural experience and tourism. That's it. That's what I would do with money.
I love it. The follow-up I have, first of all, I love that idea, but the follow-up I have to that is, what is the impact, or do you think much about the impact that you want to leave on the world as a non-entrepreneur? As a person?
Yeah, it does make me feel a little nihilistic because I'm sitting on an impressive travel resume. And what impact did that have on the world, and what do I have to show for it? I don't know. What is the value of expanding my capacity for empathy and learning how systems work and identifying things I like about certain cultures and wish we could bring back? What is the purpose and use of all that if it all just continues to live up in here? Mm-hmm. So I don't know.
Well, and I would expand on that and say that you're not just a travel resume. You're a pretty well-worn human being.
Yeah.
And to that point, so the paths, and I don't want to make this too personal, but the paths that you can traditionally do is like, okay, I can do something philanthropic. I can start a business that seeks to sort of, I always say like see the world as it could be and can't help but take action, right? I can have children and pass that on to them through my bloodline or whatever. I could teach, whatever it may be. But I'm just curious if you've given much thought to that. And if not, maybe off recording, I'll continually push you towards some version of that.
My thought was, so back to, so another idea I've had is about like pairing the things you're good at or your passions to how can you aim that and make the world a better place. I also think that aid is a very challenging thing. I don't think people appreciate how challenging effective aid is. If you donate food to Africa, you are making it a worse place. So how do we effectively provide aid? And I always wondered if, given my propensity for adventure and travel, if I could provide an example to younger people that maybe don't have a sound family structure or as much economic opportunity, if I could provide a canvas for them and say, hey, man, I'm going to take this kid from the south side of Chicago sailing once a week this summer. And everyone would say, what the fuck is that going to do? This kid can't afford a sailboat. Yeah. I'm like, yeah, but he could spend 4 hours with this dude who's navigated the professional landscape well and show him that, hey, if you delay gratification and rely on your discipline, eventually do you understand how loans work? Like just spend time with me and we're going to be out on the water. And yeah, you're never going to own a sailboat. Kid, I'm renting this sailboat. I don't even own it, but I'd like to expose someone to use my passion and bring in someone else and see if I can't, without being directive, just say like, hey man, like to get here, it takes education. From there, it takes work, but eventually it pays off. And this is what it kind of looks like.
Yeah. I just had a conversation the other day with somebody and I said, not everybody, I think that folks that are gifted to be visionary or have vision, whatever that means, right? In a literal sense, in the not grandiose sense, but like if you have vision for what you want to see the world be, and it's, hopefully good, it's almost like you have a responsibility to share it with those folks that don't. Because there's a lot of people that I meet and I go like, hey, what are you into? And they go like, I don't know, what should I be into? And like, to me, that sounds like craziness. It sounds like nonsense, but it's like, oh, well, is there a responsibility for those folks who have vision? And I would say sort of the same thing here, whether you want to call it vision or just like life experience or sort of like a view of a bigger picture than maybe most people are exposed to. I do think there may be a responsibility for you to share that in some way. Candidly, off recording, I told you I think you'd have a great podcast. I think you have to love the medium in order to do podcasting, but maybe that's something else. Maybe it's writing a book. Maybe it's something, but I'm going to hold myself accountable to checking in on that and seeing where that goes. The second question, which you already, I think, sort of answered, is if you had to stop doing what you're doing for now. And so for the purposes of this, I'm going to say you can no longer travel and you can't work the way you work. What would you do with your life?
Okay, so I have to change career. So no traveling and I have to change careers.
I'm making it up on the fly here. And typically it's for an entrepreneur. And I say like, you've got to give up your business being a gym owner or whatever, and you have to start something new. And since travel is the thing, I'm going to pull travel from you. So you can't just travel.
Sure. Yeah. So, I've lived through, let me put it to you this way. If you've loved something in your life, if you've been privileged enough to love something in your life, it will eventually break your heart. So for me, traveling has hurt me. The two things I've fallen in love with over the course of my life was strongman and strength sports competitions and traveling. And both of those things have hurt me. So I'm reluctant to say, I can give you an answer to what I would do over the next 10 years. I am loving the mountain life. I live out. I'm at 7,400 feet right now. We got some snow last night. I went for a short walk today. It's gorgeous outside. I would like to curate a mountain-based life. right? So if I can't work remotely digitally, I'd probably get into some sort of like ski shop ownership or something like that. I'd build a life out here, probably farther west, a little bit more remote.
That's cool. That's cool. Maybe real quick, just rattle off any resources, somebody that's been listening to this, if they've made it this far, you got them. So like, what should they do? You've mentioned some books they can read. I'll link those below, so I won't make you restate those. But are there websites? Are there organizations? Are there, what can somebody do to both reach you, but also what would you recommend somebody do if they wanted to get started sort of vagabonding their little butts off?
Sure. So I'll start with the travel stuff because that's easier for me.
Yeah.
I recommend a couple things. The books that I mentioned, I dive into, if I were to start, I would start with the Rick Steves, and then I would read Vagabonding. And then once I had a little bit of travel under my belt, I would read the third because it's a little more entertaining once you've had that lived experience. I would usually pricing is a concern, usually because the cost is usually one of the limitations. It's always time and money are the two limitations to seeing the world the way you want. So a couple of ways to make traveling more affordable. So you can use Skyscanner or one of the sites to find cheap flights. I recommend flying open jawed, which is not round trip into the same city. So fly into London and out of Paris. That will save you a lot of time because that way you don't have to go back to the place where you started. You can use those, you can just like end in Paris, and that could be your last 2 days. If you're young and inclined to stay at hostels, I recommend hostelworld.com. And now that Airbnb is ubiquitous, that's the other recommendation. If you want a little bit higher experience, or you want to feel a little bit more like a local. I mean, it's a cliche, it's part of their ads, but when you're traveling and you're staying in a downtown in someone's apartment, you really do feel the experience a little bit more. I mentioned reading a book about the place you're visiting, either from a historical perspective or through the lens of a fictional character in contemporary time, so you can understand the place better. And I don't know any of those resources online. You Google like books to read while visiting Japan. And I'm not cavalier about like, oh, just do it, just go. Like, no, it needs to be something that's really calling to you. So my last ironic piece of advice with how to get into the travel game is don't do it if it's not calling you. It's challenging. It's a pain in the ass. It uses time that you could have spent with your family. A lot of cons to the game too. So don't do it if it's not for you. And to add on to that, you can find a lot of adventure locally. I don't care where you are. I mean, you live in Indiana, right? Like you're in the Ogden, right?
I'm in the dunes, yeah.
Yeah, right. So it's like that's a gorgeous part of the country, and most people have never been. People in the Midwest have never been. It's fascinating. You can find adventure locally too. So maybe start there and see if that type of take a long weekend and pretend you're traveling and go see Milwaukee or something,
And you really can. One of the things I like about you, and I try to do this when I can, is you sort of are a tourist in America too. Like I said, about going to travel in Vermont. And, I've spoken to you, you're going to Colorado or whatever. And that I think is really important as well. Yeah.
Yes. I think that my point is like adventure is in you, man. Like, and you can check out Obscura.com if you want to like find out like weird local things to see in your town. I use the Google Maps to drop pins in all these places I want to see throughout the country. And I do it too. So I get a lot of people like, hey, man, why do you travel so much? Like, have you seen your own country? I'm like, trust me, I've done some domestic travel as well. Then your last question about how to get in touch with me. I have a hard time explaining my position on this because I work in digital advertising. I do media buying across all the social platforms for a living. I'm also an advocate for not using them. Mm-hmm. So I don't have social. I don't have any social media except for like LinkedIn. I have a Facebook account, but it's dormant. So you can always email me if you want to shoot me an email.
Okay.
I'm happy to throw that link in the description.
Yeah, we'll throw it in the link. Great. Well, Collin, thank you so much for coming on, man. This was really great. I'm going to hold you to it. I need to have you back on. We got to talk about philosophy and the iron life, bro. We
can do strength training another time. And then we do digital advertising if you want, because that might be of value to some of your entrepreneurs.
I got to tell you, I would love to talk to you about it and go from there. We'll take that from there for sure. Thanks a lot, man. I appreciate your time today.
Thanks so much. Yeah. Take care.
Thank you guys so much for watching or listening to the show. If you enjoyed the show, please don't forget to show us some love by liking, rating, and subscribing so we can keep making more and better content. If you'd like to support the show and get a great additional content like exclusive shows and even live group masterminds, please head over to patreon.com/Spear and Clover to become a member of the tribe. If you're interested in learning more about how we help entrepreneurs, visit spearandclover.com or message us on any of our platforms. Thanks again, and we'll see you soon.